Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Definitely appreciate everybody's time today. We're in for a special treat on today's episode of Monetizing Innovation. We have Timothy Chow with us, and he is no stranger to innovation. Timothy's background is he is a pioneer of cloud computing and a former president of Oracle On Demand, longtime lecturer at Stanford University, founder and chairman of initiatives like Pediatric Moonshot. With a career that spans Silicon Valley startups, large scale cloud transformation, and cutting edge AI, IoT advocacy, Timothy offers a unique perspective on how technology and innovation can reshape industries. From enterprise software to global healthcare equity, join us as we explore his journey, the future of cloud, AI driven healthcare, and what the next wave of computing really means. And for benefits, we'll make sure that we put your contact information into the chat as well, if that sounds good, Timothy. And
Perfect.
Perfect. So we definitely appreciate it. Timothy, obviously you're no stranger to the challenges of innovation and bringing new technology to the market. But what are some of the biggest lessons that you can share with us in terms of your background and where you're at now?
Yeah, I've had a long career in the business of shaping people's minds. I serve as the chairman of a B2B accelerator called Alchemist Accelerator. And then because I teach at Stanford, I have a great set of students that started a company about 4 years ago that have just eclipsed 30 million in revenue. So I've seen all the different patterns. And I think at the end of the day, anything that's new really has to go through. If your audience has not read Crossing the Chasm by the great Jeffrey Moore, I mean, it's 90 pages. Highly recommend you just read through it. It's an old book, but I think the wisdom of it continues,
Yeah.
which is that really at the beginning, you really have to talk to the early adopters. And the early adopters are, by definition, people that buy your vision actually more than they buy your product. If you're talking to people that ask you questions about ROI and tell me the 10 other people that have done this, as in the terminology, you're on Main Street. And if you're early stage, you don't have any business talking to Main Street people. It's thank them for lunch and move on, right?
You're
Uh,
still building the roads at this point, right?
yeah, and I think the trick in enterprise software is I say you have to talk to 10 to find the one. Healthcare and life science, I think it's like 25 to get to one.
I would echo that sentiment.
Yeah, okay, good. But I think the key, because when you're developing anything new, I don't care whether you're inside a corporation or outside the corporation, it's really getting that first group of people, the early adopters, into the boat with you that you have to do. And your biggest limiting factor is not really money, it's time. And so you have to be very judicious about going, that's a Main Street person. Thank you. Oh, that's an early adopter. Let's keep talking and nurturing and all those words. But I think that's really what, and then to appreciate, which I've said to many young startups, I go, you guys, look, if you come in here and you say, I want to do X, you really are signing up for a 7 year commitment minimum. So you have to be patient, persevere, right? And I'm talking about enterprise software. In healthcare, it may be 14 years. It's longer. It takes a lot longer for change to happen than any of us would like, but it's kind of a fact. So you have to be patient, you have to be persistent and realize that it's going to take that time, that you have to build that way, that you have to work with the early adopters so that you can get to, in Jeff's terms, crossing the chasm so that you are in the bowling alley and on the Main Street.
No, that is so true. I do agree with you. That's one of the best books I think any innovator could read just to give a good founding.
Well, I
So
think it's a good framework to think in.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's very different actions, right? When you're talking about ROI and things like that in those early phases, that's really the wrong metric. It's really much more like you said, your metrics are more about can we understand what the customer need is and drive some of that understanding into what does that mean technically.
And I think really finding people like I keep using the word they buy the vision, they share the vision. That's why any successful startup, you see this over and over again. About 4 years later, the customer goes and works for the company because they're as they're as intermeshed, they're as bought in to the vision as someone, and many times more so than the people that work at the company because they see the true value of this and they bought into it, you know. And so I think that's really the key is finding those people. And then obviously the second part of this, I always talk about executable strategies. So you can have a great vision and all that sort of stuff, but if you can't do something, if you can't execute against that vision, then you don't have the other part of it, right? Which you have to have. And I think it's the coupling of those two things that really is kind of the engine for being able to do innovation, transformation, moving people to the next step.
What are some of those challenges that you see, especially in terms of, like you said, coupling those two because it is so critical, right? You have to have both.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the work we've been doing, and so as you introduced me, I have no medical background, no healthcare background. You know, I took biology in high school, so I've had a long career in tech. Did retire as the first president of Oracle's cloud computing business. I went back to Stanford, started a class in cloud computing, and it's there now, roughly 10 years ago. A strange student arrives who has an MD, an MPH, an MBA. He's chief of pediatric cardiology at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. His name is Anthony Chang. And I like to say Anthony adopted me. And so I started learning things like, oh, you got to be kidding me. You guys are still using CD ROMs? I I did a lecture last year at Berkeley and I said CD-ROM. Young lady in the audience raises her hand and says, "What is that?" I said, "Well, I was going to tell you that's how we got movies and music, but then I realized that wasn't relevant either. I don't know how to explain it." And as people in the medical community know, and I know now, yes, that's kind of the way state of the art is. And then at the other end of the spectrum, and I think people today understand this, is if you're going to go build accurate, reliable AI algorithms, you're going to have access to large quantities of data. Otherwise, you cannot train these things appropriately, right?
Absolutely.
So that's why around COVID timeframe, I'm sitting around thinking, oh, watch Netflix all day or maybe do something useful, right? I grabbed a group of engineers, people I've worked with in the past, and we gave ourselves a mission, and that is to reduce healthcare inequity, lower cost, improve outcomes for children locally, rurally, and globally. So, how are we going to go do that? Create real time, privacy preserving AI applications or agents, is the modern way of saying this. AI agents based on access to data in all 1 million healthcare machines in all 500 children's hospitals in the world. That is what we call the Pediatric Moonshot. And I like to say, I think we named it correctly.
I love the whole concept and vision too. I think that is the right name.
Yeah. So it is I'll say, well crafted statement of a vision. But back to my comment about, okay, do you share my vision? Yes. But okay, how do you execute this vision? Right. So we kind of started looking at the world and we said, well, the current way of building AI agents, AI applications is really you centralize all the data in a big data center in Louisiana. You go find a terawatt of power and you crunch, crunch, crunch. And I did build one of the first Oracle data centers in Austin, Texas. So I appreciate the technology and the need for doing this for a whole class of applications, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense to go do this. However, in healthcare and life science, it's never going to work to go try to do a centralized architecture. Number one, data sizes are much larger. Sound images, ultrasound studies are a terabyte, one of them. Just for compare and contrast, GPT-4 was trained on 1,000 terabytes of data, 1,000, because it's all text data, right?
Right.
That's just 1,000 ultrasound studies, which is nothing, right? To give you a sense of scale, the 500 children's hospitals today generate 6 million terabytes of data a year
Wow.
just in cardiology.
Wow.
Right? Now, if you extrapolate that to all the other areas of a hospital or clinic and all of adult medicine, I mean, the numbers are beyond belief. So go try to store that in a data center in Louisiana. build a small thermonuclear plant out back. Not going to work. Security, much tougher. And then obviously privacy requirements, much more strict. If you look at this globally, Norway saying we do not want Norwegian data leaving Norway. Actually, three of the Australian states have three different privacy laws. Right. So once you say that, you go, what's can't work this way of trying to bring the the data to the application. This computer science 101. Let's move the application to the data. It's the other way around, right? So we create a company called Bevel Cloud to create a distributed AI cloud infrastructure, a real-time distributed AI cloud infrastructure, a privacy preserving infrastructure, which literally moves the data, the application to the data. So this means we are putting cloud servers inside the building, inside the firewall, in every clinic, hospital, ambulance, research lab, imaging center, right? In a giant distributed network. I contend it's the only way we're going to end up cracking healthcare and life sciences is by engineering a completely new infrastructure.
Yeah, and I can only imagine the challenges, right? And I think your knowledge of data and security systems alone, right, gives you that insight that a lot of folks might lack.
Yeah, well, for us, you can imagine the very first time when we went to a hospital and said network, and they looked at us, and it was NFW, and and we kind of knew this going in. I mean, it wasn't surprising, right? So we actually engineered over 30 security and privacy features. One of our core team members has over 15 years of privacy law experience. We knew from the get go this was an important area to address and address well and engineer for, as opposed to run away from or try to come up with some other half baked answer, right? Let's go into the teeth of the dragon and solve this problem, which, as you already have said, given the background that many of the team have in infrastructure and software, we kind of know these things and we're able to engineer. And actually, back to executable vision, we actually deployed 8 zones in 3 continents because we wanted to prove that this technology could be deployed on a global scale. And we learned a lot in doing that. It just give you a sense of this by our estimates right now is it takes 9 to 12 months to deploy a zone in a hospital or clinic. That's not because of technology, not at all. Security reviews, privacy reviews, network engineering conversations. You might not be surprised. You go into some of the larger institutions, and there's actually no one person who understands how the network works. So we've been in meetings with like 6 people who actually all work at the same place, but they don't actually know each other because one guy's responsible for this and one guy's responsible for that. And we have a very prescriptive, you might guess, way in which the servers are put in so that there is secure connections
Right.
uh, inside inside what we call the zone, as well as out of the zone, as well as across zones. So it's not willy nilly; it's engineered. So we need people to come to it from an engineered perspective. So yeah,
In some respects, you might be the data matchmaker.com, right?
a lot of people it's interesting you say that. I actually don't I know everybody talks about the data being valuable and all that sort of stuff, which is yes, I understand why people say that. Aggregation and storing of data is like, why do we even talk about that? I just told you every year 6 million terabytes of ultrasound cardiology data, like a little sliver is in the world is digital exhaust today, by the way, just goes out into the ether, but could be used to train algorithms of all different forms. It's not really about aggregating it and saving it and storing it away, which I know why we've come from that point, but I don't think it's really about that. It's really about compute. It's really about how do I compute on this in a privacy preserving way. So we've been I'll just talk a little about so this is an infrastructure. We liken it a little bit to what Apple has done. So Apple created distributed infrastructure. It's called phone. They distribute around the world. They gave programmers access to a camera and access to GPS information, and then told the world, go build stuff, right? And so we have Instagram and Lyft and Uber and I don't know, 400,000 applications sitting on that phone, right? So at Bevel Cloud, we kind of see the world the same way. We go, we're giving programmers access to a camera. It happens to be an ultrasound camera. We actually do have GPS information, and we're telling the world, hey, go build oncology applications and cardiology, et cetera, et cetera. So because we started in imaging, I'll talk a little about imaging right now, because imaging obviously is such a rich data form that today, most people in this world know, basically once the image, CT, MRI, ultrasound is taken, it's abstracted by a radiologist, a cardiologist into a 2-page PDF. And that's it. Pretty much at that point in time, the image disappears from their world. And given a lot of this stuff is done on premises, they do it because they don't want to keep paying for bigger disk drives, right? But also because nobody knows what to do with it anyway. I mean, I could give you your own CT scan. You go, well, thanks for the picture, but so what? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So the abstraction is all people, but we're sitting there going, no, no, no. Right. Computers know what to do with this. So remember, I made the point about real time. We're not trying, we don't believe the world is a bunch of after the fact reports. It's real time. Like, the patient is brought in, there is a brain bleed. Is that something that that patient needs to go to surgery right away on? Like now, not 3 weeks from now.
Exactly.
Why think that way, right? So the way we've architected the systems, our servers see the image pretty much as it has been created. And now what can you do with it? Right. Well, if your readers are interested, you could go to there's a site we created called App Commons, APP commons.bevelcloud.ai. And I'm sure you can put it in the show notes. And basically, what we've done is we've gone into the research community and found over 140 research projects where a researcher at Mount Sinai or Stanford or wherever has gotten a hold of 1,000 ultrasound images, 500 MRI images, right? And created an AI algorithm to, for instance, diagnose pancreatic cancer or to do early detection of congenital heart disease or to do early signs of progression of MS, et cetera. They all share, and if you go there, you can see they all share something common, which is they're all trained on very small data sets because it's just the data that the researchers could get at their home institution. Sometimes they've been able to get it from 4 or 5 others, but it's still relatively limited. So it's great because they get a publication in Nature magazine, but it never leaves the bench. By the way, the chances of it being accurate in the real world are pretty slim, right? The analogy I use for people who haven't thought about this is yes, you can go train a Waymo car to drive very accurately in San Francisco. Pick up that car and go to London. Do you think it's going to work? I mean, it's never seen that you drive on the wrong side. It's never seen roundabouts, whatever. So it's no different in this story. You have to get large data sets to train on. Now, so you go, okay, I just told you we have the capability. I said 6 million terabytes. We could put these servers anywhere and everywhere on the planet. So, okay, I now can touch every MRI image, every ultrasound image, et cetera. An application can do that. Okay, so one thing it can do is it can go, I've built an inferencing application, which means I'm using what I've learned to tell you that, oh, you should turn right, or this is a brain bleed, or whatever.
Right.
Okay, but I just made the point, most of the stuff out there is not very accurate because it was never trained. So this leads to a giant question, which is, so how do I train without moving all the data into a Louisiana-based data center? And so I'll say, with all credit to the consumer side of the world, they've been working on this problem. So Siri, which is the one we tend to use as the example, actually, Siri doesn't take John's voice print and send it to the Apple Cloud to learn on. Number one, what about privacy? What else is John talking about? Right? And then two, who's going to pay for the network bandwidth to move that data around, right? So instead, they actually, Google Keyboard also did this. They said, can I learn locally on the phone and then transmit what I learn globally, which is you're transmitting a bunch of model weights, which is technically a bunch of floating point numbers. And like, you could intercept it, you can have all of it. You can't learn anything from it. You transmit to an aggregation server, and the aggregation server says, okay, I can learn from all million phones or all 10 million phones a new model, and then I can replace, right, Siri version 1 with Siri version 2, right? So this idea of distributed learning, or some people talk about federated learning, personalized federated, swarm learning, they're all variations of how do I learn in a distributed world. And we've done preliminary work. There's at least 2 teams in Germany that we worked with who we all know this could work. We've seen the evidence this could work. But the trick in AI is, yeah, there's the theory it could work, but you can't do it until you have the data. Like, you're stuck, right? So we are completing the world's first distributed AI lab for children's medicine. I will describe it as 32 zones, all imaging machine data available in real time, all PACS data, all EMR data available, 2 authorized applications. This is roughly 3,000 servers, roughly 2,000 terabytes flowing through it annually, and roughly 6 million patient digital twins. And I'll come back to that in a second, to be able to perfect the, I'll call it the fine art and science of how do you do distributed learning. So I've been funding all of our work to date. This next step, we've estimated at rough 50 million, a little bit beyond my checkbook. So we launched a capital campaign for the Pediatric Moonshot basically about a month ago at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. We are targeting foundations who have done donations in the past into children's healthcare, family foundations, corporate foundations, et cetera. And we fundamentally believe, unfortunately, in children's medicine, there's really no commercial angle to this. The only way to play this out is philanthropically. And so that's the plan we are on. And obviously, as your listeners are interested or know people, we're glad to talk to them. They have a very precise roadmap of what it is that we intend to do with the money to both perfect, right, all the different forms of AI agents,
And that
children's medicine.
that information's all available on your website as well, right?
It is. It is. It is. I have to make a comment about the Commonwealth Club launch. The guy, so there's a moderator. It's just he and I. So he's basically doing Q&A. And I have to tell you, I'm sitting there at first. I've only met him like 15 minutes earlier. I don't really know him. And I have never seen a situation where the disinterested, objective third party turns into being a supporter and advocate. In the period of that time, you gotta, if you're interested, you gotta watch it.
No, absolutely. I you could see that come alive in the video. It was pretty funny.
Pretty funny. I mean, great, I mean, he posted like the next Monday that this may be the most significant thing to happen in the history of medicine. I'm like, okay, it's a little over the top, but I'm willing to take that. So yes, I encourage your listeners to go do that. So I talked a lot about imaging and whatnot, but one of the things that we started exploring about a year ago is we said, I'm going back to the question of, I don't believe that the hospitals are paying for any of this stuff. I mean, if you actually understand the economics of hospitals, it's crazy. I mean, we spent time with the CEO, former CEO at UCSF Children's. 20% of their operating revenues donations, which is ridiculous, but that's the way the world is.
Absolutely.
So I'm like, that's not right. So then we started going, well, okay, who in the world of healthcare makes money in healthcare? And I think there's 2 basic ideas, particularly in the US. One is insurance and the other is pharma. So given each one of those is a big subject, said, let's just focus on pharma. So your listeners may already know this, but the biopharma industry is increasingly moving to specialized therapeutics. FDA calls these orphan therapeutics. In fact, in 2024, more orphan therapeutics were approved than non orphan. And orphan therapeutics, by definition, is 200,000 people or less affected by this condition, which is all makes sense because we've all been talking about precision medicine, personalized healthcare, that ultimately one day, probably beyond my lifetime, but You could build a drug just for Tim or just for John. I mean,
Absolutely.
I do believe, and I think people in the field believe this is possible to go do. So in the end, 200,000 is going to become 20,000 is going to be 2,000 to 2, right? Once you're even at orphan therapeutics, as a biopharma company, you have two significant challenges. One is, okay, I have an approved therapeutic for a rare, we've started working in rare kidney diseases. For a rare kidney disease, there's only 200,000 people. How do I find them, right? Do I run Super Bowl? I mean, how many lunch and learns can I do? The mechanisms seem very, let's call it outdated, given the challenge of finding the needle in the haystack, right?
And even the
So,
diagnosing, right, is a problem for
amen. So we saw this and went, okay, there are drugs, there are therapeutics for, I'm just going to use FSGS as a example for FSGS. So then you ask the question, well, how would you know you had FSGS, right? Because I have an answer. How do I know you have? So we sat down and said, I made mention slightly earlier that we have built patient digital twins. So when we think about a patient digital twin, I have to quote, we just did a Pediatric Moonshot podcast with Ronnie Cohen, who's CEO at Sick Kids in Toronto. And Ronnie's been on this whole campaign called Precision Child Health. He says we want to use the data from the genetic code to the zip code. I told him I was going to steal this to be able to understand the patient, the child. So we said, okay, let's start with something fairly simple, which is the medical record. And it turns out we started working in oncology. Oncology patient medical records can be 3,500 to 7,000 pages of PDF. It's no wonder we've all had the shared experience that you go in the doctor's office and they're asking you questions and you're going, isn't that in my medical record? Then you understand that it's basically a record that they have a little PDF search window and they're trying to figure this out. So, we've talked to the chemotherapy nurses who will tell you it takes them 15 to 20 minutes to figure out how much cisplatin the patient was given and were there any adverse reactions, right? 15 to 20 minutes. So we went, this is actually technically fairly simple because we have a server parked inside the building. We can talk to the MR. So now we can train a local large language model, right? Not shared with anybody, local large language model to create a digital representation of John, Tim, etc., which from a productivity point of view, you can talk to that digital twin through an application we're calling Total Recall. I'll tell you where the origin of this name. We previewed this with 12 oncology nurses around the country. I would say we're pretty amazed by what it could do. And then we said, well, we turned the controls over to them. We said, you ask anything you want, right? I mean, you could ask in Spanish, it'll reply in Bulgarian if you want. All these are simple byproducts of large language models. So at some point, one of the nurses types in, what's the prognosis for this patient? And I went, okay, time out. That's not, this knows everything about the patient in the past. Okay. So, and then you start to realize, and this gets a little technical of what we've done, and I won't go into all the detail, but you can now start to think, well, there's not only data that is, the clinical data, images or medical records. There's also all this data that's occurring outside the clinic in the home. And so now you can start to merge in wearable data, demographic data, and now produce an even more complete version of a John or a Tim, right? A true digital twin. Okay. So that's great for productivity, make life easier for the nurses, healthcare workers. But there's another really interesting use case, which is, okay, I want to build a FSGS precise AI agent. So what the hell is that? Well, it's actually 34, non-fancy word is questions. Fancy word is multimodal biomarkers because it's literally 34 questions which cross urology results, biopsy results, serology, blood analysis results, for which the answer, if in the affirmative, yes or yes greater than 3, result in a certain number of confidence points that together, all 34 questions, add up to 100. Okay. Now I can let this FSGS agent run continuously in the background. And it's just, in essence, grading the entire patient pool and going, okay, if you score under 45, nothing to be said. Oh, you score over 90. Oh, I can now place in the medical record, hey, here's the 34 reasons why we believe this patient has FSGS, and here are the two approved therapeutics, right? And in between, you can say, might have, and you can now rank order the test from low cost to high cost to either add or not confidence that this patient has FSGS, right? And you can run this at scale, given the infrastructure we built, that, and, pediatric nephrology is not an expertise most people have. In fact, you could even argue nephrology is not. We actually had the work reviewed by one of the world's leading experts in FSGS. And I said, well, how good is this, Howard? And he goes, better than a fourth year med student. And then I went, yeah, who was paying attention? Because I
Exactly.
asked him, I said, well, where do you learn about FSGS? And he goes, there's an hour-long lecture on it. Like, okay. I mean, we like to euphemistically call this, we're bringing Dr. House into the house. Because so many of these conditions, like, why would you know this stuff off the top of your head, right? So we see that as a huge way to now bridge the gap between, here are the people who have the condition and here's a therapeutic, using computers in a very precise, privacy preserving way. Right. That's half the problem. The other half, as everybody knows, is the clinical trial recruiting problem. Again, if I'm going after a needle in a haystack, there's only 200,000 people. This is a tough job, right? Economically speaking, right? If I can collapse this time to recruit, I can accelerate the drug to market, which is better for me financially as a biopharma and obviously better for the patient. So we're like, this is just derivative technology. We can create a trial precise agent. So again, we'll just use the FSGS example. Let's assume that you're trying to build a drug for FSGS. Well, the first thing you want to know is, does the patient have FSGS? Pretty obvious. Okay, that's easy. Go ask the FSGS agent, does the patient have it? Right.
Right.
And then after that, you can add in all your inclusion and exclusion criteria, right? I mean, lives within this zip code or has blue eyes or whatever other things that you
Yeah.
feel necessary to do. And oh, by the way, and what's a fascinating thought here is you can run the software, in essence, anywhere, and you could go, well, we're seeing no clinical trial pay. Well, maybe this ain't worth going forward with, right?
Exactly.
Right? You don't have to kind of start up all this cost, right? So we are very actively interested in conversations with, we'll call them early adopters, given my early comment, right? Who are either on the commercial side, trying to crack through this problem of how do I, and we'll call it increased revenue for
Mhm.
approved therapeutics, as well as on the R&D front, who are trying to figure out, how do I reduce the time and effectively do clinical trial recruiting as we take the patient population continuously down. My contention is there's got to be a different mechanism than just looking at claims data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I really love this example too that you shared because it shows the multidisciplinary nature, right, of innovation and being able to cross pollinate, right, the key learnings from one field into another. And sometimes the barriers that have artificially been constructed, right, can really be changed by a whole different way of thinking. And I really am excited about the work that you and your foundation are driving. I think it's incredible, especially for children and even, like you said, the broader population at large. If we can crack this problem, it has a huge benefit for all of mankind.
Yeah, just to riff on the last comment you made, we actually have started working with the National MS Society. MS is not necessarily a pediatric. There are kids that have it, but it's not
Right.
necessarily a pediatric condition. And the campaign we're going to run is AI ends MS, because one of the things in MS, and I think this is neurodegenerative in general, is if you can diagnose this stuff earlier, unfortunately, right, the brain, if you're living with MS for 7 years, the damage is done for 7 years. On the
Exactly.
other hand, if you can figure it out in 2 years, right, and MS is I think at the forefront of therapies, right? you can arrest this. In fact, I was just talking to the CEO. There's work going on and whether it can be reversed, which is totally fascinating, right? But this all is going to require data about how we're actually tracking 7 different AI in MS imaging applications where a researcher around the world has gotten 400 MRI images and built a application which does early detection, right? So again, we are building with them a distributed AI lab for MS, 32 sites, all imaging machine data available in real time, all PACS, all EMR data, 6 million patient digital twins to push the state of the art in AI for MS, right? Being able to do earlier and early detection, and I think if this approach works, then Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, I mean, that just you can keep going with this, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I think is just so amazing about all this work. Just for our audience benefit, again, I think how they can help, especially in terms of donations, things like that, can be accessed via your website. And any other comments on that you'd like to make sure that we add?
Yeah, for those people who are interested in helping us with the capital campaign for the
Mhm.
pediatric shot, please reach out. Reach out to me. It's fine. Reach out through the website. We're not running this, just to let you know, John, as a consumer campaign, mostly because we don't know how. Instead, we have targeted over 100 foundations. So I think if any of your listeners work in foundations who are interested in children's healthcare, we'd love to talk to them. Or if they're friends, et cetera, or interested themselves. I mean, some people may be willing to, put a considerable donation into this. If that's true, then please reach out to us. Yeah, we're all in on that. Yeah.
And I think it's so exciting because, to your point, this really has the potential to change the face of healthcare moving forward, which is phenomenal. Any other last words that you would really like to share with the audience, or any other key takeaways that you'd like to make sure before we part ways today?
Just to tell people as they're interested, share this podcast with them. Their websites, we do a podcast under Pediatric Moonshot. Actually, we just had the CEOs of Children's Mercy, Nemours, a number of these who are all in essence lending their support to this mission. So I think it's the more people that know about what we're trying to do, and thank you, John, for supporting this by giving it visibility. Any way in which people can do that is just more than welcome.
No, that's so super, Timothy. And we really, this has been a fantastic discussion today. I really do think the viewers are going to get a lot from this discussion, and definitely look forward to continued success with the program and anything we can do to support your work.
Yeah, appreciate it, John.
And super, and just to wrap up too, I think again with my background, I have that history and innovation. If there's folks that you're aware of that need help or assistance in some of these thorny problems, please keep me in mind as well. But hopefully we can go viral with this podcast, right? To get the good moonshot, a pediatric moonshot on the front page for everybody. I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, amen to that.
Seriously, I can't thank you enough, Timothy. I think this is fantastic, and really excited about the work you and your team are doing. Well, super.
Appreciate it.
Well, that wraps us up for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you the next time.